Night arrives without announcement. There is no bell, no signal, no clear moment when day officially ends. The light simply softens, shadows lengthen, and footsteps begin to fade. The last sounds of the day do not stop all at once. They thin out gradually. A distant voice passes through a doorway and disappears. A final footstep echoes once, then does not return. Air begins to settle into the space. Inside the ancient library, the air changes. Night arrives without announcement. There is no bell, no signal, no clear moment when day officially ends. The light simply softens, shadows lengthen, and footsteps begin to fade. The last sounds of the day do not stop all at once. They thin out gradually. A distant voice passes through a doorway and disappears. A final footstep echoes once, then does not return. Air begins to settle into the space. Inside the ancient library, the air changes. The warmth of the day remains for a while. Stone holds heat longer than skin. Wood remembers the touch of hands. Even after people leave, the building does not immediately forget them. During the day, voices once moved carefully through these halls. Scholars spoke in low tones. Sandals brushed against stone floors. Hands reached for scrolls, unrolled them, and returned them to their places. Those movements have ended now. What remains is their absence. Only space remains. The space does not feel empty. It feels held, as if the room itself is aware that nothing more is required of it tonight. The library at night does not feel abandoned. It feels complete. Rows of shelves stand quietly, holding thousands of papyrus scrolls. Each one rests where it was last placed, tied with thin cords, marked with simple labels. The shelves do not lean. They do not shift. They remain exactly as they were left. Others are darkened by time, their edges softened by countless careful hands. Time is visible here, not as movement, but as texture. The scent of papyrus lingers in the air, dry, faintly sweet, mixed with dust and old wood. At first, the smell is noticeable. Then it fades into familiarity. It becomes part of the background, like breathing. It is a smell that does not demand attention. It simply exists, like the passing of time itself. Its light does not reach far. Shadows gather where the light ends. They remain still, undisturbed. It is not meant to. This is not a place for brightness. It is a place for stillness. Eyes adjust slowly. What was once unclear becomes softly outlined. Shelves emerge from darkness without effort. Nothing here asks to be seen clearly. At night, the library no longer tries to teach anyone. It no longer explains, argues, or persuades. The silence is not instructive. It does not guide thought. It allows thought to rest. It rests. The knowledge stored here does not disappear when eyes close. It does not fade when no one reads it. It waits patiently, as it always has. Waiting does not require effort. It does not require intention. It is simply a state of being. Long before anyone called this place a library, humans tried to remember. They told stories to one another, repeating them until memory could carry them no further. Those stories changed as they moved from mouth to mouth. Details softened, meanings shifted, but memory was fragile. It changed. It forgot. So people began to write. The act itself was quiet. Ink touched surface. Marks remained, not to impress, not to display wisdom, but to hold it still. Writing was a way to pause time, a way to keep a thought from drifting away. Words no longer depended on breath. They no longer vanished at the end of a sentence. Rooms where words could sleep. Buildings where ideas could rest without being disturbed. Sleep does not erase what exists. It preserves it. As night deepens, the library seems to breathe more slowly. The walls absorb sound. Even the smallest noise would feel unnecessary here. Even footsteps, if they were to return, would feel out of place. This is not silence as emptiness. It is silence as presence. A silence shaped by centuries of thought. Time gathers quietly in corners. Nothing is asked to move. Somewhere above, stars move across the sky. Inside, nothing moves at all. The library does not resist this stillness. It welcomes it. And that is exactly how it was meant to be. The great library did not rise in isolation. It was built beside the sea. Before it became a place of quiet, it was part of a city that never fully slept. Alexandria was a city of arrivals. Ships entered its harbor every day, their sails lowering slowly as they approached land. Wood creaked, ropes tightened. The water settled after long journeys. Cargo was unloaded with patience. Crates were carried away one by one. Nothing here happened quickly. Among grain, fabric, and tools, there were books. They did not shine. They were not displayed. They looked ordinary, wrapped carefully, sometimes worn from travel. Yet they were treated differently. Any ship entering the port was subject to inspection, not only for goods, but for words. This was not done with force. It was done as a matter of routine. The city borrowed them. Inside the library, the atmosphere shifted again. The noise of the harbor did not follow. The smell of salt and water faded, replaced by dust and papyrus. Scrolls were unrolled slowly. Hands paused at unfamiliar scripts. Languages crossed without comment. Scribes worked patiently. They did not rush to finish. They began where the text began and ended only when the text allowed them to. The original would remain. Ink dried at its own pace. A line was allowed to settle before the next was written. If a mistake appeared, it was not hidden. It was corrected calmly. No urgency guided their movements. Speed was never the goal. Accuracy was. Each letter mattered. Each pause between words mattered. The work repeated itself day after day. Different hands. The same motion. Over time, the library grew not suddenly, not loudly, but steadily. They were not celebrated. They were placed. Poetry rested beside mathematics. Medicine shared space with astronomy. Maps drawn by travelers lay folded, waiting for someone who might never arrive. There was no single subject that defined the place. The library was not built to favor one way of thinking. It was built to contain many. Inside its halls, knowledge did not compete. It coexisted. Classification mattered here, but not in the way modern minds expect. Labels were simple. Nothing about them suggested urgency or hierarchy. The act of organizing knowledge was itself a quiet ritual. A scroll was lifted. Its title read softly. Its place was chosen without ceremony. Librarians moved slowly along the shelves, adjusting placements, ensuring that nothing was forgotten, ensuring that nothing was rushed. Some scrolls were rarely touched. Others were unrolled again and again, but all were treated with the same care. Hands grew tired. Eyes rested more often. Lamps were lit earlier each evening. Their light did not extend far. It was enough to continue, but not enough to hurry. Eventually, lamps were extinguished one by one. Doors were closed. Footsteps faded. The building returned to stillness. Yet even in silence, the library felt alive. Not with movement, but with accumulation. Every idea ever placed here remained, layered gently upon the last. No argument erased another. Knowledge did not shout, it rested. The library did not belong to one scholar, one ruler, or one era. It belonged to time itself. At night, when no one read and no one wrote, the scrolls waited together, unconcerned with whether they would be remembered tomorrow or centuries later. Waiting required nothing from them. They had already done their work. And beneath the quiet ceiling of the great library, thoughts from distant lands and distant lives lay side by side, breathing the same still air, sharing the same darkness, content to remain exactly where they were. During the day, knowledge was handled carefully. At night, it remained untouched. But even in stillness, traces of human presence remained. Low tables stood where scribes had worked. Their surfaces were worn smooth by repetition, not by force but by time. Reeds used for writing rested in shallow trays. Some were newly cut. Others were dulled at the tip, shaped by hours of use. Small weights lay beside unfinished scrolls, placed there to keep the papyrus from curling back on itself. They did not move. They did not need to. Nothing in the room suggested haste. The people who worked in the library did not think of themselves as creators. They were caretakers. Their task was not to add their voices, but to preserve the voices of others. A librarian's day followed no dramatic rhythm. There were no sudden discoveries, no moments of triumph, only sequence. A scroll was taken from a shelf. It was carried to a table. The cord was untied. Titles were checked. Origins were noted. Fibers were examined for signs of wear. Edges were smoothed where time had begun to thin them. If a scroll was too fragile to be unrolled, it was set aside without judgment. If the ink had faded, it was traced carefully, letter by letter, onto a new surface. The work demanded attention, but not urgency. A steady hand mattered more than speed. A calm mind mattered more than ambition. Scribes spent hours copying texts they might never fully read. Their eyes followed the shape of letters, not their meaning. A line missed could change a thought. A word altered could mislead generations. So they worked slowly, patiently, silently. Ink dried between lines. Hands paused without frustration. Mistakes were corrected without emotion. The same actions were repeated the next day, and the day after that. Time in the library did not rush forward. It settled into routine. Time inside the library does not announce itself in any visible way. There is no bell to mark beginnings and no signal to confirm endings. Work begins when hands reach the table, and it ends only when the light softens enough to suggest that continuing would add nothing. The room does not hurry this process. It allows time to unfold slowly, without pressure, without direction, and without the need to reach any conclusion. A scroll may remain open for hours without being touched again. Its surface gathers no impatience and no sense of delay. It waits because waiting feels natural here. The air remains calm enough that nothing feels interrupted. Everything appears settled, as if it has already found the place where it belongs. Sometimes a scribe pauses, not because of fatigue, but because nothing more is required in that moment. The pause is not empty. It carries weight and presence. It settles gently between movements, allowing hands to rest without intention. No one attempts to fill this pause. Ink rests undisturbed in its container, dark and still. It does not dry too quickly in this space. The air remains steady enough to let each mark settle at its own pace. When the next line is written, it arrives without urgency, guided by the same careful motion that has been practiced again and again over many days. A hand hovers briefly above the surface before lowering again. The movement feels familiar, almost automatic. There is no need to think about where the fingers should rest. The body remembers the position. The table beneath guides the motion without conscious effort, shaped slowly by repetition rather than by intention. No one counts how many lines are written in a day. No record is kept of speed or quantity. There is no measure of productivity here. Only consistency matters. The same careful pace, repeated again and again, forms its own quiet structure, one that does not need to be explained or defended. Small imperfections in the wood mark familiar positions. The body knows where to lean, where to rest, and how to remain still without discomfort. Nothing needs to be adjusted. The space already fits the people who work within it. When a scroll is finished, it is not celebrated. It is rolled gently, tied without force, and returned to a place that has already been waiting. Another scroll may take its place or none at all. Silence does not demand productivity, and the room does not insist on replacement. Sometimes long stretches of time pass without any writing at all. A librarian may stand near the shelves, reading titles without intention. This is not inspection. It is confirmation. Everything remains where it should be. Nothing has shifted. Nothing has been lost. That alone is enough. The same routine returns the next day and the day after that. Repetition here does not feel like stagnation. It feels like stability. Predictable movement allows the mind to settle, free from the need to decide what comes next or to anticipate any change. Hands grow accustomed to the weight of familiar tools. Eyes learn how much light is enough. Breathing settles into a rhythm that requires no attention. The body adjusts without instruction, aligning itself naturally with the pace of the room and the quiet expectations of the work. Occasionally, a faint sound passes through the space, a slight movement of air. the soft shift of fabric. It does not interrupt the work or draw attention. Visitors often notice this stillness before they understand it. Their steps slow without being asked. Their voices lower on their own. Soon they move as slowly as everyone else, guided not by rules or reminders, but by the rhythm of the room itself. Hours pass without being noticed. Time is sensed not by clocks, but by the angle of light and the gradual cooling of stone beneath the feet. A stiffness in the fingers signals that enough has been done for now. A scroll left unfinished causes no concern. It will wait. Nothing here demands resolution today. When work stops, it stops completely. Tools remain where they were last used, not carelessly but comfortably, as if they naturally belong in those exact places. As evening approaches, light inside the library changes almost without being noticed. Shadows lengthen along the floor, not sharply but gently. The air cools by degrees too small to measure. The body simply recognizes the shift and adjusts, slowing its movements without instruction or resistance. A lamp may be moved slightly closer to the table, not to brighten the space, but to maintain familiarity. The flame remains steady, never demanding attention. Its presence is practical, not symbolic. It allows work to continue a little longer, and then it allows it to end without regret. When eyes grow tired, they are allowed to rest. Strain is unnecessary here. The room accepts pauses as part of its rhythm, understanding that rest preserves steadiness better than insistence ever could. Pages are unrolled and rolled again with the same care each time. Hands do not hurry the motion. They follow a practiced sequence learned through repetition. The material responds slowly, folding back into itself without resistance, as if accustomed to being handled this way. The quiet of the library is not fragile. Chairs shift slightly. Footsteps pass at a measured pace. These sounds settle quickly, absorbed by the space, rather than reflected back. Silence remains intact, unchanged by small interruptions. A librarian may sit without opening a scroll, simply present at the table. This stillness is not waiting for something to happen. It is complete on its own. Being present requires no justification. The moment does not need to be filled. Their placement is remembered by the hands more than by the eyes. Nothing needs to be searched for. Everything waits exactly where it was last needed. The library does not distinguish between moments of work and moments of rest. Both are treated with equal calm. Writing and stillness occupy the same space without conflict. Neither interrupts the other. They exist side by side, balanced and unremarkable. As night settles further, the sense of urgency fades completely. What remains undone can remain so. The room offers no reminder of unfinished tasks. It releases them quietly, without judgment or expectation. Air moves slowly through the space, barely perceptible. It carries no sound worth noticing. The atmosphere remains even, allowing thoughts to drift without direction. Attention loosens naturally, no longer anchored to any single motion or purpose. Time here is not measured by progress. It is measured by continuity. There are no peaks, no interruptions. Everything proceeds evenly, as if guided by a rhythm too subtle to be named. A hand rests on the table longer than necessary, feeling the surface without intention. The texture is familiar. It requires no focus. The contact grounds the body in place, reinforcing the sense that nothing else needs to be done. When movement resumes, it does so quietly. No transition is marked. Stillness gives way to action, and action returns to stillness, each without announcement. The change feels natural, unremarkable, and easy to accept. The room holds these cycles without record. It does not preserve memory of effort or pause. It simply allows each to occur. In this way, nothing accumulates except calm, layered gently over time. As the night deepens, the library settles further into itself. The space feels closed, complete, and undisturbed. Nothing presses forward. Nothing pulls back. Everything remains exactly as it is, and that remains sufficient. The library does not react to the passing of hours. It remains steady as the light continues to fade. Shadows soften rather than deepen, blending into corners without contrast. No signal announces that night has arrived. The room simply allows the change to occur gradually, without resistance or tension, until darkness feels expected and entirely unremarkable. A chair may remain pulled slightly away from the table, exactly as it was left. Its position is remembered and accepted. The space does not demand order beyond what already feels comfortable. What has been placed remains valid without correction. Breathing slows without being noticed. The body aligns itself with the stillness around it. Muscles release tension naturally, without instruction or effort. There is no task involved in relaxing. The room carries that work quietly, allowing the body to follow without resistance or awareness. Its texture becomes more noticeable as detail fades. Letters no longer ask to be read. They remain as shapes, present but undemanding, content to exist without being examined or understood. Nothing in the library signals urgency. There is no sound that needs answering and no movement that requires response. Attention loosens gently, drifting without purpose. The mind does not search for the next task. It remains where it is, undisturbed and complete. The movement is brief and insignificant. It does not alter the atmosphere. Light remains soft and consistent, offering only what is needed. It neither invites focus nor draws the eye beyond its quiet purpose. The room feels enclosed, not as confinement, but as shelter. Walls hold the space together, containing sound and motion. Nothing escapes outward and nothing intrudes inward. The boundary remains quiet and intact, supporting stillness without effort. Each step settles before the next begins. The sound fades almost immediately, absorbed by the floor and the air. Silence returns without effort, unchanged and complete, as if nothing had disturbed it. The library does not observe those who move within it. It does not record presence or absence. People are allowed to come and go without acknowledgement. The space remains unchanged by their passing, holding no memory of movement. Time continues without emphasis. There is no awareness of transition. Continuity replaces progression, and the sense of forward movement dissolves into steadiness that feels calm and sufficient. A hand may rest at the edge of a table, fingers unmoving. There is no reason to lift them yet. The contact feels complete on its own. The moment holds itself without needing to be finished or resolved. Thoughts slow, not because they are directed to do so, but because nothing encouraged them forward. Calm gathers naturally, layered gently, without effort or awareness. The air remains even, neither warm nor cold. It requires no adjustment. Breathing stays shallow and regular. Nothing disturbs the balance that has formed. The room maintains this state without intervention or correction. As night advances, the library remains unchanged. Darkness does not alter its function. It simply becomes part of the environment, accepted without comment or reaction, settling into place alongside everything else. The library moves into a deeper stillness that does not feel new. It feels familiar, as if it has always existed in this state. Nothing presses forward. Nothing calls for attention. The space remains patient and complete. The room no longer distinguishes between movement and stillness. Both exist without contrast, blending into the same quiet presence. Whether a hand rests on the table or remains motionless at its side, the difference feels insignificant. Light continues to soften until it barely outlines the shapes of shelves and tables. Details recede without disappearing completely. Nothing is lost. Visibility simply becomes less necessary. The room does not resist this change. It allows clarity to fade gently, leaving only what is needed to remain. The sense of time loosens further. There is no awareness of how long anything has lasted. Minutes and hours no longer separate themselves. Everything settles into a continuous state that feels uninterrupted and complete. Any remaining tasks lose their meaning. What has been done feels sufficient, and what has not does not demand attention. The idea of completion dissolves naturally. Nothing remains unfinished because nothing is expected to be finished here. The body responds to this quiet without effort. Breathing remains slow and even. Muscles stay relaxed without intention. There is no need to adjust position or seek balance. The space already provides it. The library holds this final calm without change. No sound rises to interrupt it. No movement pulls attention forward. Everything remains exactly where it is. The moment does not close or conclude. It simply continues, steady and undisturbed. The library maintains its quiet without effort. Nothing needs to be reinforced or protected. The stillness holds itself naturally, as if supported by the structure of the space. Even when nothing happens, the room feels complete. There is no sense of absence, only a calm continuity that does not require explanation or acknowledgement. A table remains where it has always been, its surface unchanged by the passing of hours. The grain of the wood catches what little light remains, offering texture without detail. No one studies it. Familiarity removes the need for attention. The object continues to serve its purpose simply by remaining present. A shift in posture takes longer than before, not because of effort, but because there is no reason to hurry. The body adjusts gently, guided by comfort rather than decision. The room allows these changes to occur without responding. The quiet does not deepen suddenly. It settles layer by layer, each moment resting on the last. Nothing interrupts this process. Sound does not disappear. It becomes unnecessary. The space does not push toward silence. Silence arrives on its own. The change is subtle and unremarkable. No one corrects it. The material adjusts naturally, responding to its surroundings without urgency or resistance. The sense of direction fades. There is no forward or backward here, only presence. Attention no longer moves from one point to another. It spreads evenly without focus, allowing thought to soften until it no longer seeks connection or meaning. Breathing remains steady and shallow. Each breath follows the last without effort. The body does not attempt to slow or deepen it. The space supports this balance without interference. The room does not react when someone pauses. Stillness and motion are treated equally. Neither is preferred. Both pass through the space without leaving a trace. What matters is not the action, but the continuity that remains after it. Light rests gently along the floor, thinning as it reaches the walls. Shadows form without contrast, merging into the surfaces they touch. The transition feels gradual and expected. There is no awareness of how long the room has been this way. Memory does not track duration. The present does not compare itself to what came before. Time remains unmarked, allowed to pass without reference. A hand may close slowly, then open again, without purpose. The movement is unremarkable. It does not signal thought or intention. It simply occurs and fades, absorbed into the quiet that surrounds it. Nothing suggests the next step. In the absence of direction, the mind releases the need to choose. Thought loosens its hold, drifting gently without forming patterns. Objects remain where they were last placed. Their positions feel settled, not fixed. There is no urge to adjust or improve them. The arrangement has reached a point where change feels unnecessary. The room does not anticipate the return of activity. It does not prepare. Nothing is held in readiness. Sound, when it occurs, dissolves quickly. A slight shift, a faint contact, then nothing. The quiet absorbs these moments without reaction. Silence resumes without effort. The boundary of the space feels soft rather than defined. Walls contain the room without asserting themselves. The enclosure feels protective, not restrictive, allowing stillness to settle comfortably within it. Awareness narrows without pressure. It rests close, centered on the immediate presence of the body in the room. Nothing beyond this moment feels relevant. The surface of the floor cools gradually. The change is sensed rather than noticed. The body responds by settling more fully, aligning itself with the temperature without conscious adjustment. Nothing in the room requires completion. The idea of finishing loses meaning. What exists is already sufficient. The moment does not lean toward an ending or a beginning. The quiet becomes familiar, like a condition that has always existed. It does not feel new or imposed. It feels remembered, as if the space is returning to a state it knows well. Thoughts thin out without resistance. They do not stop abruptly. They simply appear less often, leaving wider spaces between them. Those spaces feel calm and undemanding. The body remains supported by the environment. No muscle strains to hold position. Balance is maintained naturally. There is no sense of observation. Nothing watches or records. The space exists without attention, allowing moments to pass without being witnessed or remembered. The air remains unchanged, steady, and neutral. It carries no scent worth noticing. Breathing continues without variation. Nothing disrupts the balance that is formed. The library does not signal closure. It does not conclude the night. It simply continues to exist, holding its stillness without marking time or transition. Calm accumulates slowly, layered without weight. Each moment adds nothing new, yet reinforces what is already there. The effect is gentle and continuous. The mind no longer seeks context. It does not ask where it is or why. Awareness remains present without questioning, content to remain unexamined. Nothing presses forward, nothing pulls away. The space remains suspended in an even state, untouched by urgency or expectation. The room accepts this condition fully. Stillness remains because nothing challenges it. The moment continues, steady and unbroken, without calling for attention. Nothing needs to happen next. Everything already is. Time inside the library does not announce itself. There is no signal to mark the beginning or end of a task. Work starts when hands reach the table and stops only when light fades enough to make continuation unnecessary. A scroll may remain open for hours without being touched. It waits as quietly as the room around it. Sometimes a scribe pauses not because of fatigue, but because nothing more is required at that moment. The pause is not empty, it has weight. Ink rests in its container. It does not dry too quickly here. The air is calm enough to allow time its own pace. A hand hovers briefly above the page, then lowers again, continuing the same careful movement it has practiced countless times before. No record is kept of speed, only consistency matters. The table feels familiar beneath the fingers. Small imperfections in the wood guide the hand without conscious thought. The body remembers where to rest, where to lean, how to remain still without strain. When a scroll is finished, it is not celebrated. It is rolled gently, tied, and returned to a place already waiting for it. Another scroll may take its place, or none at all. Silence does not demand productivity. A librarian may stand near the shelves, reading titles without intention, simply confirming that everything remains where it should be. Nothing has changed, and that is enough. The same routine returns the next day, and the day after. Repetition here does not feel like stagnation. It feels like stability. Hands grow accustomed to the weight of tools. Eyes learn how much light is enough. Breathing settles into a rhythm that requires no attention. A faint movement of air, the soft shift of fabric. It does not interrupt the work, it blends into it. Visitors notice this quiet before they understand it. They adjust their steps. Their voices lower without instruction. Soon they move as slowly as everyone else. Hours pass without notice. The body senses time not by clocks, but by the angle of light the warmth leaving the stone floor, the slight stiffness in the fingers. A scroll left unfinished does not trouble anyone. Nothing here demands completion today. At night, when work stops, it stops completely. No effort is made to continue. No thought lingers on what remains undone. Tools are left where they were last used, not carelessly but comfortably. The room holds these positions gently, remembering them until morning. And when morning comes, the same positions will be found again. This is how knowledge is kept, not through urgency but through patience. The library does not ask its workers to hurry. It asks them only to remain, and they do. Some visitors stayed for months. They arrived early, left late, and returned again the next morning. Others came only briefly. They unrolled a few scrolls, made quiet notes, and moved on. They arrived from distant cities, carrying unfamiliar habits of thought, different ways of asking questions, different expectations. Inside the library, those differences softened. No one argued loudly. Debate, when it happened, unfolded slowly, often trailing off before reaching resolution. Many visitors left without answers, but they left something else behind, traces of their presence. Margins marked lightly, never pressed too hard. Scrolls returned to shelves in slightly different positions. A chair pulled closer to a table. A lamp placed nearer to one side than the other. The library absorbed all of it. It did not resist these changes. At night, these signs remained visible only to those who knew where to look. A lamp wick burned shorter than the others. A reed left resting at an angle. Small reminders that human hands had passed through, done their work, and moved on. The library did not miss them. It did not need to. Its purpose was not to hold people, but to hold what people left behind. As night deepened, the room changed again. Air cooled slightly. Shadows lengthened along the floor. The work was complete for now. Scrolls rested where they had been placed. Tools remained where they were last used. Time itself seemed to slow, as if aware that nothing more was expected of it. In this space, repetition was not tedious. It was reassuring. The same actions, the same silence, the same calm return of night. And so the library held its breath, not waiting for the next visitor, not anticipating the next task, but simply remaining. Beyond its walls, beyond its harbor, other places slowly formed with similar intentions. They did not copy one another. They did not follow a single design, yet they shared a quiet understanding. Knowledge needed space and time. In some cities, papyrus was scarce. The sea did not always provide what scholars required, so another material was prepared. Animal skins were cleaned and stretched. They were scraped smooth, then left to dry. These surfaces felt different in the hands, heavier, cooler, less willing to bend. Writing on them required patience. Ink behaved differently. Lines settled more slowly. The runes that held these texts adapted in subtle ways. Shelves became stronger, tables grew wider. The spaces felt more enclosed, as if sound itself was asked to remain closer to the ground. Yet the atmosphere remained familiar. Knowledge was still approached carefully. not conquered, not displayed. Far from the Mediterranean, other centers of learning took shape. Some were attached to places of worship. Others stood apart, quiet and self-contained. In these spaces, reading was often done aloud. Words moved through the air before settling into memory. Students listened without interruption. They repeated passages slowly, not to perform them, but to remember them. Writing mattered here, but listening was equally valued. Silence was not always complete. Voices stayed low. Footsteps remained unhurried. Time felt less measured by hours and more by repetition. Despite differences in language, material, and custom, these libraries shared something essential. They were not built for speed. They were not built for crowds. They were not built to impress. They were built to endure. Each space understood that knowledge moves slowly through generations, that ideas require rest, that understanding cannot be forced. They were not disturbed simply to prove they existed. Waiting was part of their purpose. Daily routines repeated themselves quietly. A text was read, another was copied. Then both were returned to their places. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing competed for importance. As evening approached, lamps were lit carefully. Light remained soft, never sharp. Shadows gathered without resistance. At night, when doors were closed and voices withdrew, these libraries became almost indistinguishable from one another. Dark rooms, still air, words resting where they had been placed. Materials differed, languages shifted, but the feeling remained the same, a sense that nothing needed to happen now, that what mattered had already been preserved. These libraries did not call out to be remembered. They did not fear being forgotten. They existed patiently within the long rhythm of time, and as night settled fully around them, they continued to do what they had always done. And then they rested. No library lasts forever. Even places built for endurance eventually change. Stone weathers. Wood dries. Hands that once returned day after day began to come less often. The great libraries of the ancient world did not disappear in a single moment. There was no clear ending. Loss arrived gradually. A room was used less frequently. A door remained closed longer than before. A shelf gathered dust without being noticed. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Walls still stood. The building continued to exist. But attention shifted elsewhere. A city changed its priorities. Trade routes moved. Centers of learning slowly relocated. The library did not resist this change. It did not respond. It simply waited. Some scrolls were damaged by fire, not always by disaster, sometimes by small, ordinary accidents. A lamp tipped too close. A flame burned longer than intended. Other texts were scattered during wars, moved hastily, left behind, not because they lacked value, but because no one needed them at that moment. Papyrus dries when untouched. Ink fades when light no longer reaches it. Bindings loosen when hands stop adjusting them. None of this felt dramatic to those living through it. Decay rarely announces itself. A room might remain unopened for years. Air inside grows stale, then still. A shelf might stand untouched for decades. Dust settles evenly, undisturbed. When destruction came, it often came quietly. A fire meant for warmth grew too large. A building was repurposed. A wall was removed to make space for something new. What survived did so unevenly. Some ideas traveled. They were copied, translated, rewritten onto different materials. They moved into other languages, other cities, other centuries. Others stayed where they were placed. They waited for readers who never returned. No library chose what would be remembered. Chance decided. What remains today is not a complete record. It is a collection of fragments. Sentences preserved because someone quoted them. Thoughts known only because they were mentioned elsewhere. The absence itself became meaningful. Empty spaces on shelves. Gaps in history. Questions that no longer have full answers. Yet even loss has a quiet shape. The idea of the library did not vanish with its walls. It remained as a way of thinking. That ideas should be allowed to rest. That silence has value. Even when the shelves were empty, the space they once held remained. And in that space, something endured. Night returns to the library, as it always has. There is no announcement, no moment that separates before from after. The space simply becomes quieter. There is no audience now. No reader, no keeper of keys. Only the room remains. Shelves stand as they did before. Tables wait without expectation. Dust settles slowly, evenly, finding familiar surfaces. The air is still, not heavy, not empty, simply present. Nothing asks to be opened. Nothing asks to be explained. The words that remain do not struggle against time. They have learned patience. They do not mind being unread. They do not require attention. They exist, and that is enough. Time does not press forward here. It spreads out gently, without direction. A shelf casts the same shadow it did before. If a sound were to occur, it would feel unnecessary. Silence has already done its work. Somewhere beyond these walls, new libraries will rise. They will take different shapes. They will use different materials, but they will feel familiar. Places where people gather words, arrange them carefully, and then step away. Places that will one day grow quiet in the same way. But here, in this ancient space, there is no need to look ahead. The past rests comfortably within itself. Bindings hold, ink sleeps, nothing moves them forward. Nothing pulls them back. If time continues to pass, it does so gently, without leaving marks. The room remains unchanged. Not because it resists change, but because nothing is asking it to move. The night deepens, the air cools, and the library, holding everything it was ever meant to hold, rests. There is nothing more to remember, nothing more to preserve, only stillness. And even that does not need to be named.